you do a bunch of reporting, you listen online and stuff. What we need is more vocal opposition to this, right? I know we're 6 people here on a panel, but as the community starts to not like certain things, Battlefield 2042, for example, the player base has dropped significantly to a point where they're thinking of changing that to a free-to-play game in order to get people back. So it's like, we need to be vigilant as gamers and consumers to not participate in this stuff, continue to oppose these types of business practices, and we need to make sure that's a vote.
I understand, but remember the statistic I cited in my opening statement. 0.15% of the player base makes up 50%. So we could talk till we're blue in the face. We aren't the ones making them money. We aren't the ones that are actually that they're getting their income from. It's that small micro percentage of players that is driving this development. So we could talk is cheap, but money talks, you know what I mean? Money is what is driving this. And again, because of how the Pareto effect works, because of how they're targeting these things, because it works. Most importantly, it works. It's become a minefield of predation. It's caused untold harm, and even if you do not monetize these types of things, it does create that addictive. It does trigger these addictive behaviors in minors, for example, that will translate to when they're adults. And so when they can spend their money, they've already kind of become hooked to this gameplay loop or this mechanical loop of pay the money, get the shiny. I didn't get the shiny I wanted. Pay more money to get the shiny. It's already been drilled into their head. They've already become indoctrinated into this, for lack of a better word. I don't
know. If I could hop in really quick. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Please, Josh.
Yeah, I do think we are starting to see. I mean, this is all really a consequence of corporations prioritizing short-term monetization and short-term success and short-term profits over the long term. And I think we are starting to see the blowback, because when you focus on the short term, you sacrifice something always. And Diablo 3 is a great case study, because they launched with that the real money auction store at launch, and players were furious, and they were losing players, and they were losing long-term monetization as a result, because their player base was dying. And eventually the devs and the community spoke up enough that they just totally removed it. They removed, like, I don't think you've ever seen a game that like clearly that game launched the auction house with that design like very deeply embedded into the whole core design of the game. And to remove something like that would take an insane amount of dev manpower to achieve. So the fact that they did that and listened, that speaks volumes. And Battlefield 2040, is it 2042? Is that the newest one?
Yeah.
I think that we'll probably see something similar, because they, even though it sold a bazillion copies, it was insanely profitable in the short term. They're losing players at an unsustainable rate. Their entire long-term monetization policy strategy was based on being able to sell skins and loot boxes and new characters to a wide audience. And when they lose that player base, they lose that long-term profitability. So now they're starting to listen to the community all of a sudden. And that shows, because during a investors conference call, they announced that sales did not meet expectations. Despite being extremely profitable, it was not the blowout success that they were hoping for. So I think they're going back and analyzing that. Now, I think that so much more needs to be done, and we need to keep speaking out. And I do think that more action on the dev side needs to be taken. But I think we're starting to see the consequences catch up with the short-term thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, as somebody who's been like an outside viewer and like have talked to a lot of gamers who've been playing games for a long time, it seems pretty obvious to me that this like profit motive is like really short-sighted, because there's this whole thing where like, yes, we can like rake in a bunch of dough from a viewer like once, but that doesn't actually lead to like consistent buyback, especially if like the reality is people wait for a really long time for your game. You push all of your deadlines, you push all of your staff, so the content that you put out is like kind of trash, kind of just a rehashed recycle of old models of games, and it sucks. And it seems like a lot of people are really disappointed with a lot of games nowadays. They get hyped for months and months and months. They think this is going to be the new MMO. This is going to be the new, it's going to go back to the OGs that we fucking loved. And then it gets released and it's shit, and it's not one person's fault that it's shit, right? Like, we could talk about devs and quality assurance and marketing and all these things, but I think like it comes down to this like really short-sighted profit motive that I see within the gaming industry that is just like, I don't know where it comes from. I'm not within the industry, but as an outside viewer, it's just cringe, and it seems pretty self-evidently non-sustainable, right? I feel bad for young kids growing up on modern day games, to be honest.
So okay. I got to push back on a little bit of this, right? Not that like I'm not on your side. It's just that I am less optimistic than you all are.
Wait, you're agreeing with me, Prime? What? Are we in Bizarro Land? We're on the same side of this? What is this?
Okay.
Our land, if you agree with me.
So what I hear you doing is pointing out a few games where like the pushback from the community has been strong, right? And it's happened, right? Like if you've been paying attention to gaming news, like I have, and most of you have, right? Then you see this. It very rarely it happens where there's like a large pushback from the community. However, those are rare compared to the amount of games that come out with these monetization options on, right? And the success of those games that come up with those. So, like, yes, there are some examples where they've had to like do a complete about face, but I feel like and James Sterling does a really good job of making videos about this, is right. If you chart the course of this all, right, it starts with they introducing a new mechanic, right? Like talking about microtransactions and those cosmetics, right? Again, bringing up the horse armor for, I believe it was World of Warcraft.
Elder Scrolls.
Was the Elder Scrolls? Excuse me. Thank you. That and how that was ridiculed and like, why would anyone want this? It's pointless, right? There's a large pushback in the community, but then the devs, either those devs or other devs, end up putting more of those in, right?
There's
again and again, and then eventually, I guess it's okay. It's not that big of a deal, right? And we see that with escalating tactics when it comes to monetization, right? So right now, the big thing are the NFTs, right? People putting that in, and it's ridiculous. The same thing. Who would want this horse armor? I mean, NFT of horse armor, right? But I don't think it's inconceivable that within 5 years, it's not that big of a deal. That's what this is a cycle I keep seeing.
And to be honest, NFTs, as dumb as it is from a game mechanic, I can understand why it would be a quick, easy buck, because, you know, you take a screenshot of your game, you make it an NFT, and that's your, you know, stake in the game, right? Because that's you own that whatever you just paid. So I understand why that's being added in as a money thing, but it can be completely ignored by the mainstream community. But I think people are more outraged, and that's why a lot of people are giving Ubisoft flack, because Ubisoft's now telling the players, oh, you just don't know what you want. And it's like, no, that's strike two. You didn't listen to your community, then you told your community what they wanted to see. It's like, no, that's not how you do game development, friend. And that's why Ubisoft is going through as much pushback as they're getting.
I wonder if this cycle that we talk about, because again, we've seen examples where it hasn't worked. But what happens, at least from what I see from a consumer perspective, is like New World comes out. It does super well for a while, then everyone kind of abandons it, you know, and it lost its player base because it was horse shit. But then a new MMO is announced, and now everyone's hyped. Like, this time it'll be different. And then they all go in. You see millions of players for a little bit. The company makes a ton of upfront money. And so I wonder if this churn effect, or this crunch effect, I should say, that is being put on development teams is because developers know, or not the management knows, that even if their game doesn't do well, as long as they can keep on putting out the next big thing as fast as possible, these players who are suffering disappointment after disappointment after disappointment it's like a dog returning to his own vomit, or someone in a abusive relationship. They keep going back, they just keep going back because, again, these addictive kind of mechanics have been set in their mind, and now it's addictive we call it an addiction for a reason. It's really hard to quit. So they keep going back to these games again and again and again. And it just creates the need for crunch more and more because companies, and this is just a theory, mind you, but these developers, these management know that if they can just keep putting out the next big thing, even if it fails within a few months, they're still going to make up their costs. They're still going to make a bunch of upfront money. I don't know. That's the theory. That's what I think.
I do think that sorry. I feel like every time
No,
we
go for it.
I'll give you this one.
Oh, no. Just go ahead.
Okay.
I've already lost my train of thought.
I might have lost my train of thought too.
I can take over then. So when it comes to these quick production cyclical releases, like if you're talking about like sports games or the yearly Call of Duty that's being released, I think the main reason people continue to gravitate towards those types of releases is because when the games were good, right? When they were pure in their intent, the gameplay mechanics were good, people enjoyed that stuff. I think like Black Ops 3 was a really good one, right? That's the one people go back to, or call Modern Warfare 2. Yeah. It's like those people remember that game and they want that game. So whenever the next version of that comes out, they pick it up like quickly because they want that same game. But what's happening is the development studios just don't want to accrue risk. And I think we talked about that earlier. And it's like Call of Duty Modern Warfare was a good game, but then we had to have Vanguard. Then we had to have Cold War. And those have had less successful launches, but it's like, I think two different studios contributed to both of those releases, and the adaptation of those games has been less successful, but their install base was large because people were like, I want the next Call of Duty Modern Warfare. I want that. But I think now we're starting to see is people are not getting that, and they're starting to vocalize their disdain.
I guess here's my concern, not just like with the industry, but actually with conversations that we have about all sorts of issues like this. And even this conversation, which is that we're cycling around all the nuance that is important to bring up. But the problem is that it feels like we're saying like, it's pretty obvious that the way that the industry is treating its workers is overall not great, right? The fact that BioWare has a term for stress casualties is pretty cringe, right? An entire workplace just has a term for when people fucking have a mental breakdown because they're so overworked, right? People have fucking couches in their workplace. So it's pretty obvious that the work standards are trash and the output makes a lot of money. But to be honest, most gamers basically say, like you said, they're kind of chasing that dragon of those first games that came out. And it's like, maybe they can never get it because maybe you have novelty effect making these first games so exciting. Maybe it's not that new games are trash. Maybe it's that they're not as novel. But it seems that there's a pretty broad consensus that newer games seem to be not as well thought out. They're not as creative. They're not as like nuanced or anything like that. That seems to be the broad consensus that I get back. And people seem to be unhappy with the state of where the gaming industry is. But we're not putting our finger on even like one thing that could like change it and like be an optimal solution, which I know is like, it's a big boat. There's not an easy steerable direction, but the issue is like this whole conversation in and of itself, we're kind of talking around a whole bunch of nuance and points, but there isn't like a single thing we put on them and like, this should probably be something that shifts. And we don't have to prescribe the solution in this conversation alone, because like, who the fuck are we? But we're not putting our finger on anything even. Like, what is the shift? What is the culture that has to change? Like, what is it?
Capitalism. I mean,
I wouldn't go so far as Prime.
What did you say, Prime?
I said capitalism. It's obvious, and I'll toss this to you, Wick. Right? But I'm okay. I'm not saying that we have to change our entire economic system, though we should change our entire economic system. However, there is a culture within the game industries of impunity, right? And it's a well-earned culture because they get away with increasingly abusive practices both to their workers and to the consumers. And there's barely any pushback, right? Well, only now we're seeing a bit of pushback in terms of legislation, right? And I think it's a bit more of that in Europe at this moment. But still, it's very early days on this. And the profits are out of this world. Freaking Grand Theft Auto 5, the biggest entertainment product, period, right? Like, no matter what the category is, Grand Theft Auto 5 is number one, right? And it hasn't become number one in terms of sales. It hasn't become number one simply because of like the money made at the point of sale. It's all the other stuff, all the other monetization behind it, right? So the money talks. The money talks. So
I'm going to push back on you a tiny bit because I agree that money talks. I think profit motive over prestige is cringe, right? It seems to be the case. Even Hollywood does this now, where Hollywood used to value putting out beautiful, transcendent art in movie forms, and now they pump out Marvel movies like your dog fucking vomits. Yeah,
Marvel movies are great. Marvel movies are great. But never...
right, but they're pumping out these movies that are just like reduce, reuse, like they're just these recycles. But here's the thing: there are companies that are highly successful in capitalist systems that are changing vibes. For example, Lululemon is a great example. Lululemon has always focused on quality and lifestyle and certain ethics over everything else, and they've been a highly, highly profitable company. And so I think like capitalism is a system, is a tool, and it can be abused and it can be used well. It's obvious to me that in the gaming industry, it is absolutely being abused, but that doesn't mean that you can't change the culture within the industry itself, like more athletic companies are starting to do, where they're kind of lifestyle focused, particularly Lululemon.
If I could hop off of that and also give a more optimistic viewpoint, as I so seldom do. I do think that leading by example is something that we can do. I think that you see it with a few select games in the industry that are setting trends. I think you see it with Final Fantasy Online, whatever. I think it's 14 or yeah, 14, great example where Amazon's, what is it, New World?
Yeah.
It failed because it was a product of, I mean, there were a lot of things wrong with that. It was clearly a product of crunch, being rushed, not having a clear vision, not being managed and produced correctly. But where so many MMOs fail because they are being designed for monetization, like with monetization solely in mind, games like Final Fantasy XIV thrive because they went back to the drawing board. They released that game. It was horribly received. They redesigned it from the ground up with just good gameplay in mind, good story, with the players in mind. And it is I think probably the top MMO right now. I think it might have overtaken World of Warcraft.
Yep.
Which has gone the complete opposite route, where they used to be for the players and now they're totally oriented towards monetization. So I think when you see the success of just really good games that do what, developers sought to do a decade ago, just make good games, or 2 decades ago, I should say. At the onset of this industry, the only thing we wanted to do was make good games. We didn't really care about making money. It just happened to blow up because that was the goal, just make good games. And I think the games that focus on that, you see the success. I think that talks.
So, and I'll just be very brief here. Like when Erudite talks about the crux of the issue very much is this will continue to happen. And we could give examples of where people who haven't engaged these practices have still been successful, and that's great, that's fine. But until it becomes unprofitable to use predatory practices in your games, companies are still going to do it by and large. Until we make it somehow, and I don't have a solution for this, but whether it be fines, whether it be government regulations, whether it be developers unionizing, standing up and saying, no, we will not make these games anymore, whether it be consumers refusing to buy these games, I don't know. But until it becomes unprofitable, it's going to continue to happen. I would say that some form of government fines on the worst offenders of these practices are probably a route I would be willing to explore carefully and not I don't want to jump fully into the government should be our daddies. I'm not into that. But yeah, until it's unprofitable, it's going to keep happening.
I wonder about the crunch. That was kind of the crux of the original question, because I find I'm gonna voice this at the risk of like all my viewers are gonna roll their eyes, but I have a really big issue with deadlines, particularly in the way that we do deadlines in particularly the West. Not that I think deadlines are useless in and of themselves, but it seems to be the case that oftentimes, for example, New World by and large could have been a really good MMO, but they crunched and cut corners for deadlines to push stuff out. And fundamentally, the game flopped as a result of it. And these crunch experiences that are also destroying your staff are in large part as well because of deadlines. Now, not just release date deadlines. I understand, I've been informed enough about gaming that there's not just the release date deadline. There's lots of deadlines all in between that are causing, it's not just one crunch, right? It would be somewhat sustainable to sprint for like even 1 month for your staff. The problem is that you guys are crunching constantly throughout a game development, and as soon as you release it, you're doing the same shit for the next game that you're working on. And I think we have to crack down on this crunch shit, and I'm open to suggestions of how to do this. From my like psychological perspective, I go to like deadlines first and foremost because it's a really, really simple thing that can just get shifted and changed, that could completely change a culture. And that's what I look for, is like really simple solutions to really, really toxic, pernicious issues.
So when do you release a game?
When do you release a game?
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the negotiation, is can you figure out a way to negotiate different types of release dates?
So how do you coordinate a loose release date from the developer side with a not solid date from the marketing side, as well as the not firm date from the people that are going to do your initial reviews, right? So you have to have a stake in the ground that says, this is when all of my external dependencies are going to sync and we're going to start keeping this going, right?
Yes,
So
and
you have to have a deadline.
And
Yes.
just to kind of just real quick, so deadlines I think are a result of the demand. If there wasn't a constant demand for these things, the deadlines would be less. So the companies who use deadlines are going to be more profitable, at least as I've seen, generally, than the companies who don't. So I think until that solution is there for the profit incentive, the deadlines, I don't see it working. Maybe I'm wrong here though. Maybe someone can convince me.
Honestly, and I wish Jess's Discord was working right now because I know she would love to hop in. I'm sure she has very strong opinions on this. But deadlines, at least for AAA development, like that, they're definitely very important for like smaller studios that don't have a ton of money bankrolled, and they have to get it out. Like the resources are very limited. In AAA development, deadlines honestly mean very little because they get pushed internally all the time. It happened. I won't even go into listing all the games that I know it happened on, and usually it'll happen before like the customers even like know when a game is gonna launch. Like a studio will have a date in mind that they're like set on. They have all of the marketing in sync, like everything is ready to go, and then the game's just not ready, and they'll push it, and they'll do that multiple times. So with AAA development, deadlines can always be pushed, and I think companies are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of pushing deadlines to give the game the time it needs. Usually it's just a matter of how big is the company, how much money do they have bankrolled, can they support a decision like that? And I'm always in favor of delaying a game if it's going to make a better product, because usually they will sell better.
I'm genuinely surprised to hear you say that, because every time I've suggested this, I almost always get a pushback right after we've outlined how the crunch is destroying mental health, it's destroying quality of games, and it actually could lead to less profit overall because the game sucks. And then the moment I say, well, what about deadlines? And I'm not even firm on deadlines. Like, you guys develop fucking games that are so realistic that people immerse themselves into a world. We can probably invent a new way to have deadlines that both save people's mental health and also protect. But it's very interesting that the moment, oftentimes, that I point out, well, what about deadlines? I get an immediate pushback of like, well, what is it? Like, it's almost like, what a stupid thing to suggest. Of course you need deadlines. When it's like, deadlines are fundamentally set by people in a contractual agreement, right? Deadlines are borderline arbitrary. That doesn't mean that they're unimportant or that they're meaningless or that there isn't a lot of stakes that go into them. But by and large, one of the lead negotiators for the FBI internationally talks about how deadlines are like, what does he say? Let me pull up. Deadlines are often arbitrary and almost always flexible and hardly ever trigger the consequences we think or are told that they will. In fact, they are self-inflicted figments of our imagination, unnecessary, unsettling us for no good reason.
Yeah, I mean, soft deadlines are always necessary. You need a way to be able to gauge the progress of a project and to know if it's on track and if you will need to delay it or if it does need, more work from like different departments. And to say, like just get rid of deadlines completely, sure, that's probably unrealistic. But to say that hard deadlines even like exist at all, I also think there's an amount of like untruth to that. So there's a reason why in game development, one of the primary development methodologies is called agile. It's agile development because you're
Saturday night, man. Don't do it. Don't do it, man.
maybe I'm getting too in the weeds, but it's meant to be like on your everyone's on their toes. Everyone's willing to pivot at a moment's notice, and
I want to push back though. I want to push back here. Stronger for deadlines, right? Like, I'm not a person who likes deadlines themselves when other people impose them on me. But still, I recognize the value here, right? Like, when it comes to development, time is money, right? It's not as if you can just like extend development for a year and it doesn't come without an extra cost, right? Like,
no, of course
still
not.
have.
But nobody's
Exactly,
saying that. I didn't say that there's no costs that come with a deadline. What I'm saying is that
I know, but
the way we're understanding money here, I think, is actually kind of like really reductionist when it comes to money, right? Major corporations bankroll mass amounts of debt all the time. Money is all about the movement of debt and whatnot. If you pulled off your game for 3 months and release significantly higher tier to all of these disappointed nerds who have been frustrated with all of the past 15 games, you're going to make bank. But we don't do this.
I hear you. I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree, right? In that major corporations work off debt. One, not all the studios that have put out a product that's been disappointing for whatever reason, right, have been quote unquote major, right? Not all of them are EA, not all of them are Activision, right? There are the ones who've screwed up, right? There have been great developers who've been great in the past who've just screwed up for whatever reason, right? Like, there's a litany of reasons why. But those hard corporate deadlines, they do have a purpose, and it can be that like you actually can't afford to wait. Now, I think that comes to bad planning. I think on the other end, right, to your point, is that they didn't plan properly. Right? If you didn't plan properly for enough lead time, right, didn't scale the project so that your developers could actually accomplish it in within a fair amount of time and within like the regular work schedule, I think that's where the blame should be at. But not less the deadlines, but more the planning stage and management's overall attitude towards their workforce.
Yeah, you got to remember the entire like product pipeline of concept, early dev work, putting in storyboards and stuff. Most of these larger games take 2 to 3 years to properly develop, and then the manager's job is to squeeze that schedule as much as they can in order to recoup the cost of the development process. So I understand that we would love to have stuff take longer in development. Cyberpunk actually got delayed. Call of Duty got delayed. Battlefield got delayed. Dying Light 2 got delayed. All of these games are getting delayed, and they're having significant issues that are still with it. So it's like, as much as I want to say we need less focus on deadlines, I think Prime's on the money here, where the projects themselves need to be managed better, and they need to actually spread the load, not so much back end, but more mid end. That way, QA has more than 2 months to actually go and test a alpha build when they've actually released gold code to go to Steam or whatever. So
So what do you suggest as a solution to crunch?
So my solution to crunch is unfortunately agile, because when you actually can, I'm actually I'm not mid-level management yet. I'm getting there, but like if you're able to actually plan and say this feature is going to be worked on and ironed out this sprint. Sorry if I'm using terms now. You're able to get your team to focus and able to get them to fix stuff. Sure, bugs are going to come out in the process, but it's like my team's only going to be able to deliver this function for this build on this deadline date, right?
Right.
From there, you can go to your management team and be like, I can have a functioning thing here. But it's unfortunate because a lot of these older dev studios, they're not going in on a lot of this stuff. And I wish I knew more about some of their, design practices. But I know as a hardware engineer, I'm not always in crunch, but like whenever I get first hardware, it's freaking crazy. And then whenever right before a GA, we get super busy too. So
Yes. Are you? Can you hear?
I can hear y'all on my phone.
There's
Can
only
you hear
one
me?
type of
Yes,
email.
I can hear you.
There we go.
Right.
That
I'm
works.
so sorry. I have no idea what's going on. I was super excited to like jump in when I first disconnected, but I'm here now at some capacity. So thanks for like working with me. Yeah, and keeping the conversation going while I wasn't here. Sorry I missed it.
No, it's fine. We were talking about crunch and how to deal with it, right? I'm told you have a lot of strong feelings about that. It's
I
if you could
do.
just give your general thoughts. We'd love to hear it. Hold on, Trick, did you have anything?
Yeah, I wanted to finish my thought with Erudite
Okay.
real quick. So what I would propose, and of course this is a massive risk to the entire gaming industrial complex, is beta testing is a very strong indicator of if your game's good. Open access or early access is a really good indicator if your community is ready to take the game and if it's good. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be another period of demo. Provide the final product for free, let it, cap it at a certain time frame or level cap, but give people enough time to actually put their skin in the game and say, I like it to this point, I'm going to pay money. Or there's still a lot of bugs, I'm not going to buy this game. But you provide that feedback to the developer, and during that demo time, they can go and fix things.
Right. Could I ask you two clarifying questions? Sorry, Jess, if you want to jump in first, feel free, because you've been muted for so long.
Go for it.
What are examples of companies that use Agile?
Pretty much any Fortune 500 software developer, Microsoft, IBM.
So
I'm not gonna
I guess
list
my
more.
concern is if everyone's using Agile and Agile is the solution to crunch, how come Agile hasn't solved crunch? Okay, Jess. Apparently, Jess is like,
I
tag
would
me
love to
in.
talk about this.
Yeah, go
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and could you I come from an IT background, so I know what agile is, but most people we're just saying the word agile and they don't know what the hell we're talking about. So just give like a brief TLDR of what that is.
Agile, it's a workflow. I'm bad at like talking about what agile is, but if Turk sounded like you had
Yeah, so Agile is a program management tool set where you can help structure your programs and your projects to increase the velocity of products being delivered. So it helps schedule things. There's different frameworks and different types of tools you can do in your project to deliver.
Specifically in game development, instead of before agile, games were made where like the design was like created in phase 1 and then it would maybe go to art and then like audio, everything would be very rigidly built out. And
Pipelined.
it was a very, very rigid pipeline. And if you got to the end of the pipeline and it's like, oh wait, our game's not fun, too late. You're at the end of the pipeline. You can't go back to phase 1 and redesign it just because it's not fine. It's been designed. So, and everything's been implemented, all of the art. Like you can't redesign everything from scratch. Whereas agile, everything like that whole development schedule is kind of compressed into sprints. So you'll go through that entire like development in a cycle in like two to 3 months, and then you'll iterate over and over again. You'll go through that same development cycle over and over and over again until the game is polished, or in some cases, or often cases, not polished and released. And now I will leave it to you to jump in, Jess.
Yeah,
please.
so before was the waterfall model, which is what you were talking about, but now it's like agile where each sprint you kind of commit to, I think it's like 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to get this much work done in these 2 or 3 weeks. And you can say you're agile, but what a lot of these companies do is they want to squeeze in 1 or 2 features, hot fixes, things that just ultimately are like they think are low risk but don't give QA enough time to actually, test it and make sure that it's good. And so what ends up happening is they can overcommit, or they'll say, we're going to squeeze in this feature last minute, and then we don't have a lot of time to test it. So you either have to do a hot fix right after or crunch. And that's why you see a lot of agile still in crunch, because you can say you're agile, but ultimately, if somebody's like, yeah, I can squeeze this feature in, and they're a yes man, and they're just saying like, I can get it in, trust me, like we'll just have QA work overnight or something. And then it's a bad time for everyone involved. And I think there's a lot of yes man and a lot of, issues there. And that's why we're seeing crunch. And that's why we're seeing these type of issues still happening, even though they say they're agile. And I would like to see more pushback. And like we kind of alluded to earlier, it's kind of hard as a dev to push back, because ultimately, especially with publicly traded companies that see the numbers and the line and they just want the line to go up, they're going to say, all right, well, we'll try to squeeze this feature out. And there's a human cost to it, but really, they're more focused on the bottom line than the human cost.
Can I ask a question as someone who isn't familiar with the industry? So from
Yeah.
what you're describing it with sprinting and things, how is a sprinting different than crunch? Because what I understand from crunch is like, okay, we all got to work really hard to really get it in. And it just sounds like these multiple sprints are like you're scheduling multiple crunch times. Maybe I'm totally wrong on that, though, but that's what it sounds like to me.
The better way to think of it is each sprint is its own manageable amount of crunch, because you go into that time frame saying, I can do this feature and I'm committing to turning on this feature or whatever.
Okay,
So it's
thank
like
you for
during
explaining.
that small amount of time, you only commit to delivering that amount of work.
Are we still seeing like mass amounts of like staff breakdown with this like agile system? Because it feels like agile is taking crunch and breaking crunch into just smaller crunches. But if you have smaller crunches over still a long period of time, that can still build up to be like that's a perfect recipe still for burnout. Like the burnout might take 2 years instead of like 1 year, but you still are left with staff that are burnt out, hate their lives, and like have hair falling out because their adrenal glands. Like I'm talking like medical burnout, and that's what I'm really concerned about.
Yeah, and I think this comes to an issue with game development in general, where scope creep happens and new features are constantly being introduced by the leads, and B, game development is just messy in general. At least with hardware, you can kind of like, this is the product that we want to create. These are the components. It's a little more rigid. Like games, like how do you make a fun game? Like you can know how to make a game, but it's hard to make a fun game. And where do you find the fun?
Make a functioning graphics card.
Oh, I would have no idea.
Which I totally understand
idea
that like
what
the
you
beast
said.
that we're talking about is like infinitely more complex than like one simple thing, which is why I'm not trying to like lay blame at anyone. I'm saying like from a mental health practitioner, I'm saying this doesn't seem to be working, and it doesn't seem like anyone's actually like offering functional strategies at this point in time.
So one of the benefits of this type of program management model is during this process, the developers and people that are doing the work, they actually have feedback mechanisms that go towards scrum masters, product leads, and all this stuff. And it's like, if what you committed doesn't get delivered, you can go to that leadership team and say, hey, I wasn't able to get this stuff delivered. From there, they go up a level, and it's like, okay, this feature didn't get delivered. It's going to push back X, Y, and Z. There's a communication mechanism that's built into it to help not necessarily single out these developers that can't solve problems, but to identify these problems and help address resource allocation towards those problems.
Yeah, and there are sprint planning meetings that happen before sprints start where everyone kind of gets in a room and they'll ask like how many points, which is like the ranking system of how hard something is. It's like 5 being a lot of work or like 2 being a little bit of work. And, we'll kind of like get in a circle and brainstorm how much work it's going to take to get this done in the sprint. And then sometimes get punted to the next sprint. And at the end, they kind of have a retrospective where we like burn down. We see how many things were worked on, how many things we had to end up punting ultimately, and then like what we're going to do better next sprint. But a lot of the times, there's time constraints. We're trying to get things done and out by a certain time. So a lot of those meetings, people are just really burnt out already and frustrated because they tried really hard to like implement this thing and it wasn't.
So
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
I want to try to answer Erudite's question about like solutions. So I'm gonna try that. Before then, though, I want to ask one other thing. Do you think that network gaming has made development worse? So, but by that, what I mean is that the ability to update a game after it launches, right? So it's not that you create this package, right? This product, and you ship it, and then it's done, right? In fact, I think it was a Trick or maybe Josh was talking about Final Fantasy 14, right? And that's when it actually really worked out well because they put out a terrible product and they actually fixed it. However, oftentimes that is not the case, right? Cyberpunk is still trying to fix itself. So like I think so oftentimes management has the idea of, well, we'll get the game out the door and we'll fix it later. And then they don't. Or at least they promise their customers that they'll fix it later. And then they don't. Because one, they already have your money. If you bought it, then they have your money at that point. And the incentive to do that is less, right? So do you think that's made things worse? And after that, I do want to tackle Erudite's question.
Were you asking?
Yeah, everyone. Like, do you agree or?
I mean, I do agree. It's funny when I started working at Activision, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to pre-order games anymore. But that's just a personal preference. I think being able to put out a day one patch, kind of messes with the development a little bit because it's like, yeah, we can, if we get this out to the consumers, they already give us the money and then we can like iterate on it later. It's different than like back then when you just had a cartridge and you had to make sure like everything was perfect before sending it out. So I think there's a lot of that in like the upper management level where they're like, oh yeah, we can just do a day one patch. And I definitely think that is something that contributes.
I see day one patches as a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one side, you would love to download your game or buy it at a store and be like, this is the experience I'm going to get. I'm going to be happy. But in the current realm of things, delivering a product that works 100% usually is only done by Nintendo these days and age. I think like Metroid Dread had very few problems. They got a few like bug fixes in. But like, so right now I'm a hardware developer. This is my hack and deck. You can't see it. I'll show it to y'all if you want. But like Valve is releasing their first gaming console, the Steam Deck. It's a hardware-based platform, but there's software-based solutions. They're having to validate all these other different games and all this other stuff software-wise. So it's like, you can't do that kind of a delivery without a day one patch because everything is just so dynamic and you have to be able to adapt with the reality of things. So that's my take on day ones.
Can I ask a semi-related question real quick? How do we feel that early access has changed the way that games are developed? Because as a consumer, I've seen games get stuck in early access for long periods of time. What the game starts out at in early access becomes wildly different from the end product. And I'm just curious from a developer side, how has that changed how games are looked at and brought to fruition and to full release?
Yeah, I think that's also a double-edged sword. Before I hop to that, I want to round up what Turk was talking about, where I think I think that day one patches actually helps crunch, because instead of trying to accelerate a development timeline, to squeeze all of the fixes and features in for that, like that CD-ROM or that cartridge or whatever at ship date, you know that you've got that extra flex time. Like, yeah, this is the discs have already been made, but there's going to be a day one patch, so we've got that extra time to put in those fixes. So I'm actually very pro, you know, updates and like post-launch content. I think it significantly helps the strain on devs. To hop back over to early release, I also think that goes back to what we were talking about, where one of the solves for crunch and for like making better games is getting it into the hands of the players earlier. Because again, it's so hard to develop something and know that it's fun. The only way to really test that is to get it in the hands of the players. And early release is probably the best way to do that, and find out if it's fun or not, or what works and what doesn't, and axe what doesn't work and keep what does, and iterate on it. And it's a double-edged sword because you're right. A lot of games in early access never leave early access. They never come to fruition. Sometimes they'll just stop development. A lot of those devs are indie devs or AA studios that just run out of money. So it's yeah, again, it's a double-edged sword. But I think for the studios that incorporate it and use it in a responsible and the right way, I think it's a net positive. But again, there are a lot of companies that abuse it, just like there are a lot of companies that abuse NFTs and microtransactions, and there are just a lot of bad incentives to act in an unethical way in the industry.
Looking at you, Ubisoft, they actually gave their employees bonuses and NFTs, which was kind of funny to me because
Wait, what? They
Yeah.
they gave
that's
employees
insane.
in NFTs after they expressed that they did not like it. So
To hop. Oh, sorry, Justin.
no, I was just gonna talk more shit, but please.
You know, the NFTs could be a whole topic, so I don't want to go too deep in that. But like, if this gives you any indication of the state of NFTs in gaming, uh, I have a friend at a studio who hired a director of NFTs or whatever the role was, without any concept of what the role would include. Like the guy literally asked, like, what is, you know, what's the job? And it was like, oh, we'll figure it out. They just knew that like they had to hop. And this is not a small studio. This is not a small studio by any means. They might have had a. I'm not gonna. You know what?
NFTs are a scam.
I won't give out
just
too
real quick.
information.
NFTs
Thank
are
you.
a fucking scam.
Thank you. Thank
But
you.
like it just
True.
shows that it's like everyone jumping on the bandwagon. It's there's so much hype, even though it benefits such a small niche segment of the market. But because it's building up so much hype, every company is just like, oh well, everyone's talking about these NFTs. We gotta get on
They're
the
nothing.
NFT
You're
train.
buying nothing. You're not buying the rights to the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
You already have NFTs.
I'm with
It's just DLC. Like anytime you buy a skin, like
Yeah.
it already exists.
So
But-
I have a million questions still, centered mostly around these sprints because I'm very sus of them still. But I want to ask like people who've worked with it, like the actual lived experience of a sprint. So in say a quartile, how many sprints on average would you expect to have as a team? So in 4 months period. And if that's not a good window, let me know if there's a better window that would make more sense to average it on.
Oh, it's been so long since I've been
I
in
think
that world.
sprints are like
Just
2
you.
to 3 weeks long, and then
2 to 3 weeks. And how many hours in a sprint are you expected to, on average, probably be working? Like when you're getting prepped for a sprint, what are you planning out in your schedule? How
Your
many
sprint
friends are
is
you
like-
canceling on?
yeah. So your sprint is like your normal workday hours. So sprints are like what you account for working. Usually crunch and overtime happens for unaccounted work or ad hoc work that comes down. Because like with big companies like Activision, we have, we work with so many people and sometimes legal will say like, hey, we need to put this in because there's a regulation from China or something. And then it's like, oh, last minute, we didn't expect this in the sprint. So now we have to do the sprint plus whatever extra work is coming in from ad hoc, which ad hoc just means on the fly or, something that's not planned or accounted for. So yeah, it's just.
So how many sprints would be in a year? Would you expect?
26.
QA. 26?
Oh,
Yeah.
26
Sprints are-
2 to 3 week long periods, that's more than a year's worth of time.
If they're 2-week sprints, that's a year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you expect to
2
have
week is
sprints
normal.
all the time.
Fine.
So once you've ended a sprint, you begin another sprint typically. Is that expected?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all of it's sprinting all the time.
I do want to. I
Yeah.
wanted to. I think because of the name, there's a misconception that a sprint is like a sprint to the finish line, like it's a
Right.
My
like
underst-
crunch all the time, and that's not totally the case. It's just a technical term. Like usually sprints, especially at the beginning of development, are just normal 40 to 50 hour work weeks.
So 50
It's-
hours is not a normal week week. Let's just be super clear about that.
Well,
And
it
in
can
certain
be, it
European countries, 40 hours is also considered not a normal work week.
Well, we're in America, right?
Yeah, the most productive and most mentally ill Western country in the world. So, yes,
We make
we
these
are.
games.
Okay, so sprints, from my understanding, is you're going to set like a set of goals, correct? And you work as a team to basically agree to what all you can get accomplished within that 2 to 3 week period, and then your manager tries to like increase that a little bit. You've got game designers who are probably coming up with novel ideas, so you got a whole bunch of input, which probably increases the workload just overall. And then also probably you've got I'm assuming
so-
like marketing that's pressuring you to have it all be done faster. Is that a good representation, or am I really misrepresenting a sprint meeting?
You misrepresent some of the key components of it. So within your sprint, you're in your team, right? And it's developers, a scrum master who kind of coordinates with the team. They actually provide work as well. But from the external facing aspect, there's the product owner, and they would coordinate with all the other different teams and groups. So if marketing had a request, they would go to the product owner, and from there, the product owner goes and says, okay, this is a priority. And they'll talk with the scrum master to kind of see how that ranks with the list of other priorities. And then at the beginning of the next sprint, or depending on the severity of the issue, the scrum master then goes to the team and it's like, okay, we've got this new thing. What piece of work can we not do in order to do it? So it's like, in the ideal world, that sort of stuff would be manageable and you'd be able to, as a team, deflect that. And that's why we need good senior leadership like myself, because I'm a great leader, that are able to talk back to these product owners and be like, no, we can't deliver that, dude.
Right. Being the good manager. So here's kind of, I guess, my question of, it sounds like you have a certain like ethical leadership standard that I don't know you. I'm just going to give it the benefit of the doubt. Sounds standard. You do your best to kind of protect your team while also protecting the quality of your product. I have worked in a workplace where I definitely know that, we had twice a day meetings where we would confer about clients, pass on all the daily information, and then move on. And that's how I was told that these meetings would look like. But what they mostly looked like was people like so burnt out that they wouldn't talk, being passive aggressive towards one another, in drama fighting, a little bit of this, and then kind of it would move on, right? So oftentimes what we are told a meeting or something will look like is very different than what it bears out in the practical sense. So I'm trying to get an understanding of what is the difference between a sprint of what we're being told as consumers and whatnot and being educated about, and the actual practical lived experience of what does a sprint meeting actually look like for your guys' experiences, which I imagine
It's usually pretty chill, to be honest, until you get to crunch, which doesn't usually happen until the end of a development cycle. When you're at sprint 12 or 14 or whatever. I mean, in my experience. Jess, what about you?
It's a mixed bag. Like, I've been in sprint meetings where everything's great and we're all on it. We're all committing to the specific amount of work. There's no like extra work coming in that we have to account for. And I've been in sprint meetings where laptops were thrown. So it really is just kind of a mixed bag. And like you said, people get burnt out, and there's, you want to protect your team as a leader. And I think the problem we're seeing a lot in game dev is people just getting burnt out and leaving to other studios or other teams, and kind of like hitting that reset button. So you don't really know your team very well. You're trying to gauge how everyone works with each other. I just feel like there's a lot of churn in game dev. So I think that's a problem too, where, people are getting burnt out. They want to go to another team because this manager commits to deadlines more than the people. So people are suffering. It just really, it depends on your team and on your manager and on your leads and the product managers. Like Turk was talking about, like a good product manager will make sure that the team is covered, as well as, the work, and any work that comes in that's ad hoc, which is unplanned work, that gets fit in as well, along with the sprint. So
Okay.
And it goes back to what Prime was mentioning earlier. The planning of the project is poorly executed, and a lot of these work items get towards the end of the project. So it's like, in a good agile project managed at that point, product owners and the deliverable teams have to start chopping off features, right? Or reducing the scope
Yeah.
of the product that's being delivered. And that incurs a whole bunch of risk. And as developers, again, going back to my point, we have to be able to push back on our leadership and say, this isn't ready. It has this amount of risk attached to it. I think you were talking about it, Erudite. It's like, we're not going to get as many battle passes come month 2 because people are going to stop playing, right? So it's like, when you start going to those product owners and saying it's going to impact X, Y, and Z by 500% or whatever, they understand that language.
Okay. And so I'm wondering what the industry standard is around conversations of longevity of staff. So, for example, in mental health, okay, we have really, really honest conversations about longevity. We talk about, so for example, when I was working in mental health, we talk pretty standard. You try not to do more than 4 therapeutic one-on-one sessions a day because it's really emotionally exhausting. It's not a good model to be doing more than 5 per day. And ideally, you should only try to work 4 days a week so that you can have extra rest time. So that, particularly because we're working with highly vulnerable populations, you need to be kind of bringing your A game every time. We also talk about like the need for noticing when burnout is just beginning and getting therapeutic resources for it, strongly encouraging individuals to go to therapy. And I've seen this implemented well and poorly. Obviously, I understand every single workplace is different, so I'm not asking you to comment on like everything, but I'm wondering if, like, at least when I go through my education, I am told industry standard expectations of how to be in this field long term and not burn out, because suicide rates and burnout rates within mental health professionals is actually particularly high. And so we talk about that a lot, and I'm concerned that gaming industries are starting to compete a lot with the rest of us for burnout rates. And I don't know about your guys' suicide rates, but I would also be concerned about that because burnout and suicide are intrinsically linked, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I wish that we had, people that would go to therapy every now and then, especially after some of these meetings. But it's sad to see, people that are really passionate, they work in the field that they enjoy, and I feel like it's exploited by the employer. And because they love their job and they love what they do, they're expected to work those long hours. And I think it's kind of like an unspoken rule is you have to like play nice. You have to do all of the crunch. You have to, work yourself. You have to commit to work and work a lot. And it's I've seen people, suffer mentally. I've suffered mentally working like that, and with everything going on, like right now with Activision Blizzard and the lawsuit, someone actually did commit suicide because of the harassment that they received. And it's part of the reason why I started getting really into activism, because that person, like, I was almost there at one point. I was texting suicide hotlines every day because I was just like, wow, I am miserable right now. I'm postpartum. I can't pump because every time I get up and go in the room, my manager's like, why is she not at her desk? So it's just really, really sad to see. And it's something I wish we could solve. And like, just because you work somewhere you enjoy, you shouldn't have to suffer mentally for that. And it just seems like this thing that's so insidious in game dev, and I don't know how to solve it. I just wish that we would even open up the discussion towards it.
I think that that culture plays a large role in these things. I was in the military for a while, which also has a very high suicide rate, both in the military and out of it, because we had so much demand put on you. And the culture surrounding people in the military, it wasn't so much that, oh, these people enjoy their job or something like that. It's like, oh, you need to be brave. You need to be a man. You need to be able to take it. You need to be strong. And that culture directly impacts the amount of burnout, the amount of suicide, the amount of crap that soldiers have to put up with. I know it's a little different in private industry because you can't just quit as a member of the military. But I do think that the crux of the issue, like Erudite talked about this earlier, like there's a crux to this issue that we should be talking about. And I think at least in the military, it was culture. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong from what you're saying, Jessica, is that it's also that is the crux of the issue in the gaming industry is the culture. So I don't know how to fix that. I'm just wondering if we have any.
But
Yep, it's a culture problem.
right, no, it's. I mean, we're dancing on the answer, but Jessica, has already said it, right? You got to organize. Like these, you're right in that there's culture, right? But how do you change the culture of workforces? The bosses have every incentive to wring every amount of effort, right? Uh, all that they can out of their workers, right? There is no incentive to do otherwise other than churn, right? Like if churn gets like too bad, right, then and they can't replace their workers fast enough, that's like the limit. But beyond that, they don't. This industry keeps getting more and more abusive. So how do you change that? You have to have a counterbalancing force, right? When the workers speak, right, and with and workers want the company to succeed, right? They don't want an Activision to fail, right? Or name your favorite developer. They don't want that company to fail. They want to be able to put out a great product, put their name on that, right, in the credits. They want all those things, right? But they're not on an equal footing here. And if you have situations like Jess just pointed out, right? Like that's like that should be a workplace violation, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be legislation on that. But beyond that, there's like when those things happen, how do you enforce that, right? Like how do you enforce the workers' will? It has to be through organizing. But if you can't go to a rep, right? If you don't have your workers behind you, if they're all scared of losing their jobs, losing their health benefits, then like what power do you actually have? Sure, occasionally, I'll take Turk's word that he's a really good manager, right? I believe you that you're a great manager and that you actually care about the people under you, right? But you can't rely on that, right? As Jessica was just saying, right? You can't rely on that actually being the case, and it shouldn't be the case that we rely on that. Like people will have different work styles, right? And work management styles. They'll see things differently, and sometimes that works for a larger team. Sometimes it doesn't. But if the workers can't properly push back, well, then they're going to run over every time. Profits will trump everything else. There's no reason for them not to,
but
unless
Prime,
you have that force. Go ahead.
I'm
but
gonna.
Prime,
I want to suggest something. So one thing I noticed, and it's something I brought to all of my coworkers when I came to a new job, is how many of you personally look at the worker that does 40 hours, maybe 50 hours. They're often in before you. They might stay after you, highly productive. They climb the ranks fast and they make a shitload of money. How many of you look at those people with a large amount of respect and go, man, that's really fucking cool, right? How many of us do that? I would say in North America, almost everyone does that, right? And that isn't bad, right? There's a certain level of respectability for being highly efficient and highly productive and working hard. But the problem is when I worked into a nonprofit, we had one worker like that, and everyone would praise her all the fucking time for working 60, 70-hour work weeks until I finally was like, I actually think it's really unhealthy, and I think it's really sad that we're praising this rather than telling this person that they need to go the fuck home, because there are more important things than money and more important things than work. And now look, if you want to be the person who works 80 hours a week and that gets your kicks off, that's fine, but that is the rare select individual, and they're mostly hired by Tesla because Tesla selects for those individuals actively. And so like I think like yes, absolutely, dealing with at the top level is a huge part of it. Unionizing, all these sort of things. There's a lot of cons that come with unionizing, and there's a lot of benefits that come with it. And this is one of these trade-offs absolutely that the industry has to make. But I think there's also like this internal check every worker can do where like I had to challenge myself to not idealize workers who worked 50-hour work weeks, because when I did that, I medically burnt out. And then I had to be like, holy shit, I'm 21 and medically burnt out. Is that really a lifestyle that I want to live? Not really, right? And I fucking loved my work. I loved it the whole time I was medically burning out. The problem is that it's not sustainable. And so I guess like one of the challenges of the culture is like we kind of treat it like this nebulous thing, but it's within each and every one of us. It's these like implicit things that we just have, which is idealizing the hustle, right? Probably we shouldn't idealize the hustle as much, right? Little things like that.
Well, I would push back on that a little bit, right? Because as someone that put in the hours and the effort in order to get to where I'm at, I definitely pushed through burnout several different times, right? But as someone that sees that individual and is like, okay, I don't want to work that hard, are you also accepting that you're not going to be going as far as that individual is going to go? Because you can't expect everyone to get the same outcome from an effort perspective.
No, I just don't think that like the Protestant work ethic is like this cultural thing that we value that is like fundamentally somewhat arbitrary, and other cultures don't care about it. And so it's like, if that's something you value, that's fine, but I'm concerned that we overvalue it to the point that we like say like working really hard and climbing the ladder is not just like a good thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And if you're not interested in that, it's not good. And we wouldn't say this explicitly. Nobody's going to say this explicitly, except for like rare few assholes.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think what I'm trying to get at is you have to accept what you are capable of doing and what you're willing of doing in your certain role, and you can't be envious of how other people's outcomes that if they're putting in more work, additional work, or other types of things.
The Turk, I have a question for you in that. Because I've seen this, and I've held various types of jobs, and I've been in various different positions in my life. A lot of the times, the people who are putting in 60, 70 hours work, they do get praise, as I see, but they're not really any more efficient. They're not really doing any more than the people doing 40 hours of work. Because there comes a point where, yeah, you can put in more hours, but the amount you get done past that, just we don't see it. But because they are willing to put themselves through the hours and things like it looks good. I just don't think in at least the industries I've been in that it leads to good outcomes overall. And so I think that's the difference there. Does that make sense?
Typically in this type of industry, the output, what the result of your time put in is what's being measured, not the amount of time, right?
I would completely argue conversely. I would say amount of time people put in is like a pretty huge thing, because a lot of these places work hourly and they just praise basic. When I think of like the workers that I've worked with, the people who got praised were people who just spent more time at work. But to be honest, there's diminishing returns. Like their work quality got a lot shittier.
These industries are measured, so sorry.
What?
I mean,
What do you mean?
Of one specific industry, though, the Turk. You're speaking of your industry, which I get. I don't have experience in it, but you do. But when we talk about burnout culture in general, I understand, but it expands there. And I'm wondering, like, what data do you have to suggest this, like, that this is true? I understand that this is something we say, but do we have a metric we can use to measure it?
In my industry, yes, it's the performance results across your peers and your work group. There's the raise benefits that you get, the bonus platforms you get as a result-based.
What do you mean
industry.
Performance results? Like, are you talking about like an EPR, a performance report that your boss gives you?
Yeah, like I'm able to
okay,
solve...
but again, that's not actually producing anything. That's just what people think,
so
right?
The employer result that I'm speaking of is I'm able to solve X amount of bugs or JIRAs or whatever you want to say. I'm able to push my job deliverables to the deadline or exceed the deadline, or I'm able to go and fix other people's bugs. It's not that I'm spending more time doing that work. It's I am able to deliver that work. So if I can do that while working less amount of time, which is what I like to do, it is better, and it actually makes you a more efficient worker. And the results are what's being graded, not the quantity of hours spent on the efforts.
I think it gets dicey when you, at least in the game industry, when you mix the two, because you're right, there's definitely like performance indicators that reward certain individuals, but if you have a high performance individual who is both like his the efficiency at which they work at tied in with the amount of hours that they're putting in, they're going to like clearly outperform everybody else. And I do think it's a cultural issue where we do definitely value the amount of time put in, especially in the game industry where you kind of, it's expected, you know, it's never enforced. Like no one will ever, all the managers will say we don't force crunch, but it is expected. And if you don't show up to crunch, you're not a team player. And I think that it's just a bad approach. It never really leads to a successful outcome because it ties into the burnout issue where everyone's, you know, so focused on just shipping the game and eventually, like when the game does ship, a lot of people leave the company and they'll move on to a different company because they're just burnt out, or they'll take time off, and that's again hurting the long-term sustainability of that company, because
There's
the
only
churn is
one
just
type
like
of
you're
deal.
losing your senior
Okay.
people. Like Blizzard right now, Overwatch 2 is delayed, Diablo 4 is delayed, World of Warcraft expansion delayed, the Diablo Immortals or whatever, the mobile game, delayed. All of these games are the Call of Duty games are now leaving a annual production cycle because those are also being delayed. Like, they're just losing so much senior talent, and it's just not sustainable. You just can't, to have a reward incentive that rewards people putting in 70-hour work weeks. It's just like, I think it's just wrong, and it's ultimately hurting the people who make the product, the people who buy the product, and eventually it will hurt the companies. It'll hurt Bobby Kotick. Even I don't really give a fuck if it hurts him, but it will hurt his pocket eventually. But he doesn't care because he's in it for the short term. He wants the stock price to be as high as it can so that when he cashes out, he's gonna leave right after Microsoft buys the company. He's
I
gonna leave.
hope so.
He will.
It's
He'll
I-
take his golden parachute, and
Part of the deal.
like what's that?
It's part of the deal, I think.
Oh, I'm sure. Behind closed doors, it absolutely is. But he got his golden parachute. He got the stock price to the level that he wanted it to be at. He didn't care about who was harmed in the process of that, and now he's out. And it's someone else's problem now.
So, in my experience, people who are really fixated on performance, all these things that aren't inherently bad, they're neutral. They're a thing, right? One thing that we can value. They often come at the cost of people. And a lot of times, the people who are most fixated on these things, performance, efficiency, and stuff like that, they're more likely to climb the ranks, because the reality is that the system is going to reward things and output that benefits the money motive. And the problem is that these people become managers, and these managers are concerned still with things. They're concerned about output, they're concerned about quality, they're concerned about hours, and they're not concerned about people. And if you're in a managerial position, you should be caring about people first. That would be my argument for a good manager leader. And that's my concern, is that this culture that you're actually talking about, and to, I'd argue somewhat encouraging, is actually precisely the issue that we see within the gaming industry.
And that it's like a self-sustaining problem, because you get people who have risen to the ranks in a certain manner, and they think to themselves, well, this must be the right way to do it. And since it worked for me, they apply this standard to everyone else, when it absolutely does not work for everyone, nor should it be applied for everyone. But we're individuals. We view things as an individual, which is perfectly natural. But we have to understand there are systems in place which, even though it might work for you individually, overall it's harmful. And Josh Miller gave a really good monologue about that, about how, and give a lot of examples of where it's ultimately hurting. This isn't working. It's not sustainable. We can see that. So why are we still upholding this system? Why are we still simping for it?
So I don't disagree with you, but going to what Eurodite and yourself said, it's like, once you become a manager and you've climbed the ranks how you see fit, your output is also gauged on the output of others, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're going to be, pardon the analogy, horse whipping them to get a production out, your team is going to implode. It's going to erode, right? And as a person that fosters a team, that's not good. It impacts your performance as a manager. So as much as I like what y'all saying is correct, it's just, once you're a manager and you are in charge of people, you start to change how you're actually driving your business and producing stuff for your team. So yes, there are people that are driving the train too hard, and that's sad, and that's why we need better mid-range people to be better fosters of the people they work with.
And in my experience, in my experience, middle management is rarely the issue. Like, I've almost across the board always had great immediate managers, and then the managers above them have generally been good managers and receptive to feedback and usually care about us. In my personal experience, it's always the people at the top, like the very top, that the managers of the managers answer to. It's usually them that have unrealistic expectations that just don't really like. They're so disconnected from everyone at the bottom, that and those are the people driving the decisions. So I think that's we're probably 75% of the problem is what those top 5%. And you could probably
yeah.
Oh, yep.
No, the system selects for it because it for that 5%, it's working. They're making a lot of money. They're making a shitload of money, but it's not working for the rest of us. So something's wrong here. I don't know how to fix it. I can't propose a solution, but I think that's the crux of the issue. Is it's because it's working for the 5%. They have and they're in charge. They're calling the shots. They can override middle management like that. There's no real incentive for them to change. Why would they? They're making bank.
Well, no, because the games are starting to suffer and the deliverables that those upper management are starting to show. Just like Josh said, there are several Blizzard titles that are now delayed, Activision titles that are now delayed, because the way they've been driving it is not sustainable for the quality that's expected for the game. So it's
but is that hurting that 5%? They're just. He also mentioned golden parachutes. They don't care. They're just going to get out. They're going to drive the stock very high, and then they're just going to leave.
It won't hurt Bobby Kotick, but it will hurt those same people that I do throw a lot of the blame at. Like, I'm sure they're sweating right now because their bonuses are tied to performance, and
the top
every single one of these
leaving.
Games.
The game leads are leaving. So it's like, okay, how are we going to deliver Diablo 4 when my Diablo 4 lead leaves?
Yeah, I think they're
who am I going
sweating.
to pick? Yeah.
So I can't speak to specifically what's happening at Activision. Maybe that's all the evidence we need for your case. But this, I don't know. Profits have been rising for the industry, right? And in the end,
is that with
since we've all
inflation in mind? Like, are we, because inflation is
it's rising. No, it's straight up rising. It's like the money is there. And you'll have short-term disasters that happens with the game or not. But there's a customer base that comes back time after time and keeps buying this. So if we're not getting pressure from the customer base, except for rare occasions, and it does happen, like Star Wars Battlefront 2, right? That was a fucking disaster, right? But outside of those things,
Avengers.
or Marvel Avengers, another one, just awful stuff. But outside of that, with I don't see how this this culture that's built changes without an intervention. Right. And this intervention, like, this is not the first industry to do these things, right? This is not the first workplace to be abusive. Like, all these things that we're seeing here are old problems. When if you're saying that, well, it has to come from middle management, right? Have better people in the middle, to push back and to manage people better. Well, like, clearly that's not working. That's and it's never going to work. We have people sleeping under their desk, right? Expected to sleep there. People like moving in. There was for that BioWare game Anthem, right? Like, people literally moved into the office, right? There was that great report that like broke down what happened for Anthem, that complete disaster. But people moved in because they had to get it done, right? When it's that bad, when management has screwed up so badly, when they give them make them work with bad tools, right? They had like an improper game engine to work for that game, so they were constantly fighting against the game engine just to get anything accomplished, right? When it's that bad, but they still, but the management isn't fired, right? Why wasn't is it Zelnick is the head of that one, I think, that company, right? Why wasn't someone in management axed for that? Because profits still went up, right? You guys say that they miss that a company says, well, a game hasn't performed as well as expected. So first of all, they said it all the time about all the games. Right? Sometimes that's actually true. For other times, like Call of Duty, they constantly say, "Oh yeah, we haven't met sales expectations." When it's like made more money than it ever has before. So like you can't like actually rely on that. They just say that for stock price purposes. But like, if it's not coming from another organized force, I just don't see how it happens. Like, I don't see how it happens in a sustained way. There's only so many Turks, right, out there in management, and there's only so many people who want to resist and have the fortitude to resist, right, in a position to resist when it's by themselves, when they're like sticking their neck out alone. It has to be organized.
Yeah, I agree. Especially in a creative. Like, you want your developers to be happy to make a good game because it's a creative environment. You want them all happy and not sleeping under their desks and not throwing laptops in meetings and just, I mean, I can argue about the games industry needing to unionize all day. Let's look at the films industry. They have unionized, right? And look what happened with Alec Baldwin. They cut corners. They got like the prop teams, and they talked about like the cutting corners and using ununionized labor. And there's a human cost to that. There's always a human cost. And especially in creative environments, I just feel like the workers should be heard, because at the end of the day, those are the people that are going to advocate for the end user. Like, if you want the customer to be happy, you're going to want the people that are developing the game to be happy and actually use their input. So yeah, I mean, I agree. It needs to be organized. And the longevity that is in the industry now, it's why you're seeing those leads, like you mentioned, leads on big projects are leaving. Why are they leaving? They don't feel heard by their leads, or they have no input where they're at, and that's just a huge problem that we're seeing. I mean, we're seeing the long-term cost of the short-term gain right now.
I guess one question I would have is unionization actually going to solve this problem? I think it'll solve a couple of the problems in the short term for sure. However, if somebody who has worked with a very unionized government mental health care position, I can tell you that my union hasn't solved most of our problems, right? We still get lots of overtime work. Our work schedule is dog shit. I would work in a 2-week period. I would get 2 days off. I would work a 7 and a 5. And that was pretty consistent. That was an 8-week rotation where we had multiple 7/5s together, right? That they just split it up between 2 payrolls, so it looked like 5 and 5 on the payroll.
What's a 7 and 5?
7 days straight, 2 days off, 5 days. It was really, really terrible. And that was in a unionized. Another issue that comes up with unionization is you get individuals who don't give a fuck about the work, but they know that they can kind of just laze around because they can't get fired. And they make the work so much harder for everyone around them because it's really, really hard to fire people when certain union things pull up. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to union. What I'm saying is I don't know if unions are going to solve the fundamental issue, which in my view is essentially a culture of profit motive that focuses on money more than people. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's capitalism. I think it is, like, to be honest, like Protestant work ethic heritage that's causing like most of these problems. And I don't see these issues resolving simply through unions. Unions will do a couple things like preventing you from getting fired for leaving your work. So I'm not opposed, just to hear me clearly, I'm not opposed to unionizing this workplace at all. I'm just saying I don't know if it's going to solve all of our problems that we're talking about, like crunch culture and stuff like that. It'll solve like things like your boss shouldn't be fucking like harassing you to go sit down so you can't pump. Like that's just like, arguably that should be like super illegal. Like that's really, really toxic, right? They shouldn't be able to prevent you from taking breaks, right? Some pretty obvious things. You should get work benefits, right? Basic things like this when you're doing full times. You should have a cap for the amount of hours you can work, and if you work over that, they have to pay you and stuff like that. So unions can benefit that, but I, as somebody who's worked for very unionized places, it hasn't really solved actually this issue at all.
Well, not all human. Oh, go on, please.
Oh no, I was gonna say that's completely valid. I can't argue that like unions on a wide scale are the best thing ever. I feel like unions are what you put into it, and it's the workers that put in that work. And if you have workers that don't give a shit about, what the work is, then yeah, you're going to have that. But I would also argue that it's hard to get people fired in game dev right now. Look at Alex Afrasiabi. He was there until 2020. I was there at the same time as him, and all of the horrible things he did, he was still managing a team at that time, which is insane to me. And, it really is like how you would argue, it's hard to get fired. But yeah, there's like protections in place where there's like packages, right? Like right now, with Activision Blizzard especially, they can just fire you for any reason. They don't even have to give you a reason. It's at will. They can just say you're fired, you did nothing wrong, come back later. And that's what they do. And they have a practice where I call it permanent temps, where they'll hire people on a contract and then lay them off after a few months. So they don't have to give them benefits. They don't have to give them, and they do this because it's legally, they don't have to deal with it, right? And with a union, you would be able to deal with it, or you would have to deal with it. Sorry. I feel like they do the legal minimum required. And I feel like, with a union, there's that legal thing there where like, yes, you have to listen to your employees now.
So I just want to jump in here real quick to kind of push back on Erudite a little bit here, because I think that the examples you've given are real, but they're examples of unions without teeth, or unions who aren't working, unions poorly implemented. I don't know if unions are the solution here, and I would say that they are not. I think they're a part of a larger solution. It can't just be unions. Just unions won't work here. We got to tackle this from several different angles, at least from what I'm hearing here and the research I've done. But unions can't have more teeth than that. Unions can't have more power than that if the workers in the unions are willing to put more skin in the game and willing to be more assertive. That, I think, comes down, again, we bring it back to the culture inherent in these things. Is a lot of the times the workers won't be willing to be more assertive. A lot of times the workers will just be willing to put up with it. Oh, that's just how things are. So until we change that in the culture, I don't see, I don't know. So I guess it's not so much of a pushback really as just an additional thought.
I don't know Erudite though. When you say that it's like the Protestant culture, right? This Protestant work ethic, that makes me completely hopeless, right? If it's really this generalized Protestant culture, and I know exactly what you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
That's infused the Western world, right? Or at least here on this side of the Atlantic,
very white-centric world, particularly. Yep.
Yeah. Right. Then that seems a bit hopeless. I think maybe something like that can change eventually. I think here the pandemic actually has been the biggest thing to change that, right?
It's been
for
huge.
people to reassess their work-life balance. So it's not that it's entirely impossible, but to say that to workers from this very specific industry that's very facing a very specific crisis at this moment, right? To say disengage from the Protestant work ethic. That doesn't seem like there's no solution there.
Yeah,
right?
It seems lofty for sure, right?
Yeah.
And I think here's the thing: is I'm pretty radically opposed to the level of immersion the Protestant work ethic has within our entire system. So this is where we'll differ. I'm very pro capitalism, but I don't think we're seeing true capitalism anymore. I think we're engaging in crony capitalism right now. I think there's a lot of issues within our free market that I raise, and obviously saying, well, this one industry. To be honest, I think what the gaming industry is experiencing is a different expression of the same problem in lots of industries. There are lots of issues where we're seeing people regularly exploited, regularly underpaid, regularly overworked, because there's kind of this dogmatic view that I'm going to work myself to death, and that's a good thing. And then I'm going to retire at 40. People talk about this like it's a good thing. They're like, I'm going to work so hard that I can retire by 40. And then we're like, hey, guess what? Those people, their suicide rates are 4 times the average population. That shit doesn't work. And they go, oh, well, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, we know that shit doesn't work. It doesn't work. That's a fallacy that you're engaging in. And they're like, yeah. And then they just go right back to it, right? And this is the issue that I have is people being like, yeah, I do want to just work my ass and make a whole bunch of money, because the reality is that money will only trigger happiness past basically being middle class, right? After that, we see no improvement. And people who retire at 40, who've spent their entire life working 50 to 60 hours, men between the ages of 40 to 55, particularly if they're retirees, are the number one group that is suiciding. They are the highest likelihood group. And so when we preach this idea within our culture and we act like it's a good thing, and I don't know if the Turk was praising exactly what I was saying, but it's we shouldn't be praising this. This is actually super, super fucking unhealthy, and it's not good. It's what European countries countries are moving away from. They have 32 work-hour weeks. They're very big on work-life balance. They're very big on realizing some people get their life from work, and that's fine, but most people get it from family. Most people get it from leisure. Most people get it from social connections in their life, right? Work is just one avenue through which you can have purpose and meaning in your life.
I get
I
my purpose
absolutely
meaning.
get it through work. I absolutely get most of my fulfillment.
Which is great, and I'm not trying to take this away.
Super unhealthy.
If you wanna get all of your life from work, that's fine, but it's not a good thing to prescribe to most people because it's pretty obvious that it's not working for most people. Which is why I'm saying like
Not happy. I wouldn't prescribe it.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
I find coming on Prime panels is what provides me fulfillment in life. So, there's that. But to put a specific number on what Not So Erudite is talking about, because she's exactly right here, I think, don't quote me on this, I'm 90% sure this is right. Anything over $80,000 a year doesn't really increase your happiness overall. $80,000 a year seems to be the point where people have enough. At least this was the case about 5 years ago. So, after that, it doesn't really do much for you. But
Buy me a house, though. A
I
house in
disagree.
LA, I would not be able to make.
this is just from the
I
data.
disagree
that we
with that.
see.
Yeah, I know, and I disagree with this so much, but that's a separate conversation.
Okay.
Completely separate. But no, but yeah, I hear you.
Take it up with Jonathan Haidt then.
I will. Oh, fuck that. What? Yeah. So then, all right. So for our remaining time, and we have like 20 minutes or so left here. We have not really talked about solutions in terms of like focus on the consumer end. I've talked to people about loot boxes. I've talked to like my best friend IRL, right? And it's been multiple frustrating conversations, right? Because there are people who just kind of accept this, right? That, this is kind of how the business is. And it's not maybe even entirely a bad thing, right? You're dealing with a massive population of millions of individuals who have different ideas as to what is fun, right? One, I think I'm actually curious about like what this new generation like really looks at gaming like, because I'm worried about like, are we just old people complaining about like a new wave, right? A new wave of innovation. That's a possibility, right? It could be that we remember, a time before where like you got a fighting game like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, right? And it had like like dozens and dozens of characters that you just unlock by playing it, right? And then that was it. You got the whole game, right? And we remember that time, but there's also like good things about like microtransactions, and that like when you have games that can update with DLC characters, it gives them more time to work on these things. MVC2, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, had a lot of fucking bugs, and now this gives the developers more of an incentive to actually work those things out because, yeah, more money coming through, patches and all that. So are we just part of the old wave, right? And like we don't like these loot boxes, but like the new generation thinks it's not a big deal. So it's like maybe we shouldn't worry about that. And if it is a problem, right? On the other hand, if it is a problem, then how do we actually solve that? Like with a customer base that seems more or less okay with it.
Prime, I have a question for you. Do you think that I'm going to go on an outside tangent and I'll bring it back, I promise. Do you think that white supremacy can be dealt with at a cultural level? Through like activism, protest, stuff like that? And I would consider like things like BLM movements, I Can't Wait. I would consider all that part of like a cultural movement. Okay.
Sure, we've seen an effect.
Yeah, I would agree. And so if we say like the Protestant work ethic is dominantly a more like white historically ethic, it's just a cultural norm, couldn't we combat that, which I would argue to some extent saying that the white way is the right way when it comes to work is to some extent a little bit white supremacist. It's not nearly as white supremacist as other things like actual white supremacists, but it's within that spectrum of it, right? Could we not battle those culture values the same way we've battled other culture values like aggressive, explicit white supremacy, like saying black people are like less, what was like old claims, like less evolved, right? And we've done a pretty good job of battling those in the culture front. Could we not battle the same like unhealthy work ethics with culture movements?
I think it's a definitely possible. And again, like this pandemic and like the Great Resignation, right, is proving that.
Yeah.
It's not in an organized fashion, and I'm not saying
Yet.
unions in this case. Yeah, I'm saying that it's a spontaneous thing that workers have been doing, right? And this wave of like feeling like work should be meaningful and not brutal to you, right? I think that's fantastic. I like to see like some more organization around this, more focus, more demands being placed on employers to actually speed that process up. But I don't think it's impossible what you're talking about. I think we're seeing it happen at this moment.
And I guess what I would argue is that we're not going to see these like workplace cultural shifts unless we actually target like white centric values and that infest these workplaces and basically kind of loud them out through like different values that we bring in, right? We have workplaces there are some new like co-ops and different things that are bringing in new models of working that are so much healthier, workers are happier, and they have incredible productivity because it's almost like when workers enjoy their lives and don't hate things, that they do better work, which is crazy, I know. But I think that like one of the best ways that we could like tune this out, like demanding it of consumers, I just come back to like a major consumer of video games is going to be 15-year-old kids who steal their parents' credit cards, and they're not interested in like ethical purchasing. They're just wanting the cool new game, and like we're never going to move those people. I think it's actually changing like the cultural zeitgeist that is infused in most workplaces.
No. So I just want to separate those two things. One, like the biggest like customer base, right, is people in their 20s and 30s. Those are people who have disposable income to play like video games, right? That's like the marketplace, right? So I'm not so concerned about I'm concerned about the attitude of the 15-year-olds, right? But not necessarily their buying habits yet, because they don't have the power to like exercise their buying habits in a more like focused way. So there's that. And then
I have a question.
you said something else and I forgot what it was, but it was I'll figure it. Okay.
Yeah. So Erudite, do you know of a successful software developer that it tries to run in more of a co-op business model, that kind of like what you're proposing? Because I don't. None of those come off the top of my head.
No, but just because I can't find a positive example right now in a field that I'm not deeply immersed in doesn't mean that there are not other fields that have done this and that other fields can't replicate it and tailor it to their needs.
Yeah, and that's fine. Would you say something like the Google development pipeline sounds like a better one, the way they structure their work?
I have no idea what the Google pipeline development system is.
They're definitely a lot more lax, and I could share some of this information with you guys, but they're definitely a lot less crunch centric, like what we're talking about tonight, and they're more open in how they structure their projects, how they contribute to projects, and how they deliver it. It's a lot more.
Do you have the data? You can just tell me. Are they more productive? I'm just willing to hear what the data is if you have it.
For Google specifically, they cancel a hell of a lot of projects, and they actually develop a lot of technology that cancels other projects. But I would say that Google employees are generally happy. I think that's a pretty safe statement to say.
Okay.
I don't have data to back that up, other than anecdotal talks with Google people.
Sure. I guess I
definitely
think I'm
have
missing
less-
your point. Maybe with that.
My point is, some of these different program structures and how we actually structure businesses to create products don't necessarily facilitate in the larger scale of things, right? Having a worker co-op for certain types of products can make sense, but when it comes to an industry where there's several different pieces moving together trying to create something, a worker co-op just doesn't fit. But there might be a different model, and that's why I was asking the question, that might be more lucrative and adapting towards the gaming industry.
Yeah, and I'm open to all of those things. I'm not trying to prescribe and like say what specific thing is. Just to be clear, I'm also not saying like we should just have communism and state-run companies. Like that's not what I'm saying either. What I'm saying is like I know Prime is. I'm just making sure that we're disentailing like what I'm advocating or not. I'm actually decently pro-capitalism. I'm just not pro-crony capitalism. I think here's the thing: humans have been brilliant enough to invent new systems of functioning all the time. And all I'm saying is I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 2 to 3 years, if we see a new system of employment come up, and I think it would be good, but I don't know if that system can arise if we don't get rid of some of these insidious Protestant work ethic values that are killing people and causing them to suicide and causing them to hate their lives and not have a good work-life balance or have any social connections.
So would you say respecting your fellow coworkers is a white-centric work ethic?
Nope. But that's not what I'm talking about here, right? Respecting your fellow coworkers isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when your coworkers shame you because you are having a mental health problems and you're behind on your work and you're depressed, and they're mostly just caring about the fact that you're keeping them behind. Yeah, I would say that has origins in a Protestant work ethic, absolutely, where it's focused more on the product than on the person. Definitely. That's why Protestants say, literally, they joke about being like, oh, I don't care about my body. I just like worked until it broke. And I'm like, okay.
Are you saying
Well, I think there's a better term for this. Let me look it up. But there's a better term for this. It's I think it's not manifest destiny. That's not it.
Are you
but
saying
this belief?
Protestant?
No,
Like
this belief, this religious belief. It's a religious belief that those who have money deserve to have it. Does that make sense? What's the name of it? There's a term.
You mean
a pretty Protestant belief is giving to those that are in need.
Okay, I don't think you're understanding the historical context of what we're talking about. Like, we can branch onto this whole other thing, but like Protestant work ethic is a zeitgeist central to dominantly Canada and USA because we are countries rooted in Protestant. So Protestant comes from the fact that most of these countries used to be dominantly Christian countries, and certain Christian countries have certain values that are connected to them, particularly Protestant values. Work ethic is just one of them. Now, all these Protestant things that I'm talking about aren't related to the religious element anymore. It's related to the cultural zeitgeist of work ethicism. Does that make sense?
And just to be clear,
you're talking about prosperity gospel.
Prosperity doctrine, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not talking about prosperity doctrine actually at all. I'm talking about work ethic. Like there's kind of this Protestant zeitgeist. It's actually pretty unrelated to the religion. That basically like Protestants, if you've ever been raised in like a Protestant space, a lot of Protestants really do value working until your body breaks because being a hard worker is one of the most moral good things you can do. Where being a hard worker is definitely a good thing you can do, but it's not the right thing that you can do always, right?
Would the amount of effort you put in as a professional basketball player be of that same zeitgeist?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Would being a professional grade basketball player and the amount of effort that you put into that profession, would that also be part of this zeitgeist you're talking about?
So do you know what I mean when I'm saying zeitgeist?
No, I'm an engineer.
Okay.
I develop video games.
That's fair. Yeah. I just want to make sure that we're like not talking past each other because of just like simple misunderstandings with words. So a Protestant work ethic is a concept. It's a value system within a culture. So it's not like a tangible thing you can like put your finger on. There are little examples of how it plays out, right?
Yeah.
Just like if you believe that you can
A
overcome things, it
professional
has an
grade
effect.
basketball player fit this same rubric that you're describing?
Maybe you're not telling me enough about like what this professional basketball player's personal positions are on work ethic are.
I mean, they worked their ass off to get through high school into college and then to get drafted to a professional NBA team and go and make millions of dollars. They put in a lot of effort and worked really hard to get.
You want to talk about burnout, though? I mean,
yeah,
isn't there a whole other topic? But you want to talk about like abuse in the workplace and burnout? Like, look no further than professional sports. That's a whole different topic, but I wouldn't exactly use that as the like moral blueprint for how things should work.
Yeah, it's just a concept that's been studied. It's a named concept. So if you're not familiar with it, that's super fair. Probably it's not the best for me to just like go through the history of the etymology of the concept Protestant work ethic, but you can look it up. It's a thing. It's a named category of cultural beliefs.
Okay. So I want to really get to that question that I posed, but I'm not sure we're gonna have enough time to like properly like
Sorry.
hit
Sorry,
that
Brian.
one up. No, it's fine. No, it's fine. I think it was a really interesting conversation. Okay, to my audience, we are going to continue on with our open walk on panel right after this. The content does not end. I'm going to give these people an outro, right? But we will continue on. We're going to continue on this conversation. I saw you guys in chat. You guys had a lot of opinions as to what was said, right? And so if you want to continue on with that conversation, get your say in here, right? I'll let the Turk know how wrong he was on everything, right? Then then I'll give you the space to do that. So stick around, stick around. I'm just gonna give these people an outro. But before that, if you've been enjoying this content, hit that follow button, right? If you've been here, if you liked what we done, what we've presented to you here, well, then hit that follow button because we do this all the time, 6 nights a week, right? Don't want you to miss out on any of our content. Exclamation point social and chat. For our social media, we have Twitter, where we tweet this out. If you didn't know this was happening, or you weren't on Twitter, right? Because we talked about this. Discord is where you'll can be a part of the upcoming open panel and our larger community here, right? It all happens on Discord. It's a sense of everything. Join into Discord and be a part of the community. We'd love to have you. And then, of course, there's YouTube. YouTube is where you find the VOD. If you missed any of this, right, go to YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and consider becoming a YouTube member and supporting this channel, right? So if you want to see these videos hit you daily, right, well, then consider hitting that join button and becoming a member. Thanks so much. All right. So I'm going to give an outro, but again, the content goes on after this. So we'll start with Wick. Wick, buddy. Thank you for coming through. Right. You helped us out at the last second. Lots of things fell through, unfortunately. But Wick, I'm so glad that you end up coming through and being a part of this. You got quite a bit, and I liked your perspective. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for thinking of me. Thanks for inviting me. I really think this discussion is important to have. There's actual harm being done to people right now that is being swept under the rug. It's not really talked about in mainstream spaces a lot, and we need a lot more awareness of both what happens on the industry level to the workers and as what's happening to the consumers and how they're being preyed upon. If you like what I do, even if you hate me, you can come see me at twitch.tv/deathofcertainty. I am streaming again. I had one of my first streams since being back the other day on Thursday. Not So Erudite was kind enough to join me, as well as Mix Vivian Wolf and Mad Lad, and we had a great discussion on deplatforming. My discussions tend to be a lot more calm than you might find on PrimeCayes, but they're fun, they're interesting. Come on by, give me a follow, give me a sub. Thanks for inviting me, Prime. Love to be on all your panels. Are really cool, especially the closed ones. I think a lot more productive stuff gets done on the closed stuff. But anyway, thank you.
You don't like the royally madness that is the open panels?
It's a different kind of fun, let's say.
That's a different kind
Productive,
of fun. Okay.
but fun.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Right. Next, we're going to go to our special guest, Jessica Gonzalez. Thank you so much, right, for coming through and giving your unique perspective on all this. This was like really entertaining, and it's a subject I really wanted to tackle. And there's so much more, right? We really didn't even like tackle the consumer side. So there's so much more to talk about, and you're gonna have a platform to talk about that, right? So please tell what about that.
Yeah, well, for one, thank you for having me on. This was a great discussion. I'm very sorry about the technical issues, but glad I was able to bring it back in the end there. I had a wonderful discussion with everyone here today. But yes, like you mentioned, Josh and I actually have a show that's launching on Twitch. It's called Weekly Stand Up. We're going to be talking about workers' rights in the game industry. So a lot of what we talked about today, we're going to continue the conversation and hopefully keep that, torch lit and maybe, bridge that connection between consumers and developers. And that's the first launch is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. Please, give us a follow on Weekly Stand Up at Twitch. We also have a Twitter page, and we will be uploading on YouTube as well. But yeah, again, thank you so much for having me on. This was a great discussion, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. This is awesome. You guys are great.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Oh, wow. Look, we didn't scare her away. All right. That just means she doesn't have enough experience.
No, I like you. Yeah.
I'm not scary. I don't know why people are scared.
Chaos.
Well, thank you so much. Right. And our friend Matt Latin, who's been assisting both of these two with that, has put the link in chat for their show. Please, everyone, check it out. And we have Josh Miller, the other part of this dynamic duo, or is it multiple, more than that? I don't know. This dynamic
Josh
team.
is great.
Okay, Josh is great. Josh, thank you as well for coming through, right, and sharing your experiences. I think they were extremely valuable, right? Like we can try to do these things by ourselves, right? These conversations, and we do, but it's better that we have people inside the industry. So thank you for sharing a bit of your time with myself and my audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I thought that everybody had valid points today. I don't think anyone was wrong or right. And the solution is, it's multifaceted. There's not like any one single solution. Also, I'm sorry that I keep touching my eye like throughout this. The audience is probably like, "What's wrong with his eye?" I'm sickly right now, and I'll just leave it at that. That's why I keep touching my eye. Um, and also, the director of our community relations gave me a prompt to say, and I'm just gonna read it word for word. So here we go. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you so much for the audience for hearing us out. If you care about the topics we covered tonight, Jessica/Josh and I are working on a brand new Twitch show called The Weekly Stand-Up that launches tomorrow at 4 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. PST. All one word, no spaces. Please give us a follow. We'd love to see you check us out. There will be an interview and some discussion on game development and the state of unions in the game dev work space. All right, thank you so much.
That was beautiful, Josh.
It was
Thank
very
you.
well done, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
And don't worry about touching your eye. I put my fingers in my mouth constantly. Like, I know
Probably why I got
goddamn
eye
times.
disease.
No big deal. So, okay. But I'm glad. Oh, I'm glad you seem to be on the mend. But yeah, everyone, the link is in chat. Madeline spamming that link, right? I'm going to follow them as well. I'm definitely going to be checking out their content. So I want you to be able to do that. And my friend Revolt Rise says that we should call you a troika rather than the dynamic duo, a troika, right? Okay, it makes sense. Let's go next to the Turk. Turk, thank you. You also gave an interesting perspective because you had worked on the hardware side of this, right? Thanks for coming through. And you aren't you ain't crazy like I am, but you as management gave us insight as to like what is needed on that particular side of it, right? I only see things as a worker, but as management, it's actually very useful to know how you think. So thank you so much, Turk.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I do hardware development professionally, going on, I don't know, 12 or 13 years now. So I'm not management yet, but I do lead teams and I deal with all international kind of stuff. So I'm very familiar with this stuff, and I'm currently not under crunch. That'll happen fourth quarter into the first half of next year as we bring up a new product. But I really think that when it comes to game development, right now there's a bunch of high-profile things that are bringing a lot of eyes to the problem, and I think that's a good thing. And I think they need to be addressed properly, which is good. And you don't have me disagreeing. But what I will advise to everyone, people watching the show, people here on the panel, if game development is important to you and the games you play are important to you, provide feedback. Try and help people actually become involved in the process. I had a guy in my chat wanting to learn about low-level computer architecture stuff, and it's like, you got to help people guide them on their path, and you can't keep promoting these types of managers that are just going to drive teams till they die. You need people like me that are going to be mindful of people that I work with and work for, and we got to deliver good products. We need better games. So I'm not this evil conservative that you guys paint me as. I'm a good conservative.
He's a good guy.
One of the good ones.
Yeah. Thank you, Turk. Right. And last and certainly not least, actually the first person I had invited to this, before Mad Latin said like, oh, this would be a good idea to like have Josh and Jessica on, right? Then I'm like, so this idea for the panel formed around Erudite, because I know her background. I'm like, okay, so we're be talking about video games. Let's talk about like the psychology of it, like the mental stress of it all, right? So it formed around Erudite because I knew having her on, right, she's going to be an MVP and she does not disappoint every time. Thank you, Erudite, for coming through, and also proving that yes, you are indeed right, the friendly face of liberal enemy. Because with your pro-capitalism takes, but still, we again so happy that you came on. You added so much to this
There's
that we
only
would
one
not
type
have
of
been
meal?
able to touch
Okay.
if you weren't here. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys all having me. Yeah, I just want to make it clear that I think, I think this is an industry that there's no simple solution to, and I never want to come off like I think that there's a simple solution to anything, particularly in an industry that I'm not like deeply involved in myself. But overall, thank you, Prime, for having me on. It was nice to kind of meet all of you. Josh, everyone's trying to decide if you or I have the better jawline, but I think I'm leaning towards Josh having the better jawline. Mind you, the Turk might have a good jawline under that beard, so it's hard to say. But yeah, overall, I really appreciate you guys having me on, and I think that there was a little bit of productive conversation at least here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, all right. We're going to continue on with our open walk on panel right after this. Anyone here is welcome to join us, but if not, that's okay. Thanks for spending your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your passion with my community. I know they appreciate it just as much as I do. Have a good one. Bye.
I'm still streaming, so I'm gonna hop out. If you guys want to talk to me specifically, just let I can stay, but just I'm still streaming. So I don't want to let anyone like thinking they're not public anymore. Okay, have fun. Yeah. Yeah. Bye. Okie dokie. I'm gonna move you